Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We have French, Spanish, and English translation. There is a box at the bottom of your screen marked interpretation. If you click on that, you can choose your preferred language. And during the webinar, if you have questions for the discussion later, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom. Welcome to the official launch of the Monique and Roland Weil People's Academy of International Law. My name is Marjorie Cohn, and I'm a member of the Bureau of the International Association of Democratic Lawyers, or IADL, and I am the founding dean of the People's Academy of International Law. IADL was born as a result of the anti-fascist resistance and grew alongside the decolonization movement. Many of the primary instruments of international law are the result of the struggles of people around the world, first against fascism and later against colonialism. These treaties, covenants, and conventions are, in essence, progressive tools that can help vindicate fundamental human rights, including the right to live in peace. International law is in crisis. Since the adoption of these international instruments with progressive content, reactionary forces have tried to neutralize them by claiming they contain merely aspirational rights and are not binding, rather than recognizing them as sources of rights which can be effectively enforced. These reactionary forces have also selectively used some rights to destroy others. Today, right-wingers are openly declaring that they want to abolish the United Nations, multilateralism, and some human rights. This crisis of international law is inextricably linked to the crisis of the world capitalist system. Some progressives have been influenced by the campaign of attacks against international law. They decry the challenges of implementing international law, for example, in protecting the rights of Palestinians, and preventing and punishing military aggression and unilateral sanctions in violation of the UN Charter. They erroneously conclude that international law and the United Nations should be reformed or abolished. The traditional teaching of international law, which is marginalized in academia, does not generally allow us to grasp the essence of international law and to transform these instruments into tools for emancipatory struggles. The dominant teaching of international law does not contextualize it or study historical dimensions. Rather, it is often presented as a succession of static and formalistic rules. IADL, therefore, aims to educate generations of lawyers and legal workers by defending the legacy of people's struggles as reflected in international law. Progressive jurists around the world must be empowered to seize these instruments and use them as tools in the struggle for people's rights. We need to be knowledgeable, even expert, in the laws that help people achieve their goals. We must know the content of human rights instruments and customary international law that enable us to defend people's rights to development and economic justice and the right to peace. To preserve ecology and a healthy environment, we must be knowledgeable about ecology and environmental law. To promote human and people's rights, we need to know about international labor standards and ways to hold multinational corporations accountable. To promote our ability to hold governments and others accountable for international and national wrongs, we must be aware of all mechanisms available, both domestically and internationally, to oppose impunity. There are many areas of law and issues which we as progressive lawyers with an internationalist and anti-imperialist perspective need to understand. Creatively using the law to advance a people's agenda is effective in a wide range of political contexts, but it is contested ground. Often, new analyses and strategies are necessary to avoid retrenchment by a conservative legal elite. In many places, the US is a prime example. More extensive and strategic use of international law and legal mechanisms can augment existing legal strategies, uncover new vistas in progressive lawyering, and help solidify international norms through domestic legal victories. The Monique and Roland Weil People's Academy of International Law is an online initiative of IADL. It will aim to put the tools of international law into the hands of frontline advocates for people whose human rights are at most at risk or have been violated. It will draw on the expertise of noted international law scholars and progressive lawyers to present participants with an overview of international law and its application to local and international struggles. There are many lawyers with expertise in international law, but few who work directly with people involved in the struggles for peace, freedom, justice, and equality. Legal activists on the ground often lack expertise and exposure to the international legal system and its potential applications, both in terms of local problems and as a tool for building international solidarity on the issues they work to address. Providing practical instruction in international legal tools and opportunities to meet people's lawyers from around the world, this will be a powerful way to enhance grassroots movements and help them contribute to a more effective international system for protecting their rights. The pandemic has led to an unprecedented opportunity for online training and discussion. Modern communication technologies make it possible to reach large numbers of people throughout the world and disseminate progressive content to them. The People's Academy will present an intensive 2-year academic legal program for lawyers, legal workers, and activists who seek to utilize international laws, norms, and enforcement mechanisms in their work. The training will feature a range of notable experts in international law, both legal scholars and activist lawyers, and provide concrete ways to use these legal tools to support progressive movements. One aspect of the People's Academy that makes it unique is that our instruction will follow 2 different tracks. International legal principles will be taught by recognized experts, and a second track will explain the application of these principles to particular people's struggles. Over a period of 2 years, we will present 9 courses and 10 seminars, which will be open to lawyers, activists, advocates, human rights defenders, victims, and others. Participants will have the option of registering for the 2-year program or for individual courses and seminars. So our program will include, first, the main international principles and instruments that are important for democratic lawyers, and second, how to use those principles to support people's struggles. So we have courses and we have seminars. Each of the courses will be taught by one faculty member who will make a presentation on the international law principles, and a second faculty member who will discuss a struggle experience related to the theme, followed by discussion. Each course will be taught in 2 sessions lasting 3 hours each. The seminars will cover key current topics in international law. Each seminar will last 3 hours with 1 speaker or a panel of 3 to 4 speakers. We will go beyond the purely academic teaching of international law and share with the participants on knowledge of international law as living instruments to utilize in the support of people's struggles. We are recruiting a distinguished faculty of scholars and legal activists. We hope to have special rapporteurs, noted academics, and progressive lawyers engaged in teaching the practical application element of the courses. To ensure that the courses and seminars adequately represent the perspectives of the Global South, we are recruiting experts from around the world. The faculty will also include a wide range of activist lawyers working in some of the world's leading human rights NGOs and other institutions. Participants will receive detailed practical information on how to utilize international law in domestic systems as well as existing international mechanisms that often serve as a last resort for defending human rights. They will work together, guided by experts, to wrestle with real-life situations where international laws and mechanisms can be effective. And they will join a cohort of people's lawyers from around the world who can continue to interact and support one another and take steps to build transnational advocacy coalitions that can bring marginalized communities together across borders to defend and advance their human rights. The People's Academy of International Law has a distinguished scientific committee composed of 16 leading experts from around the world. You will hear from them throughout this webinar. I would like to thank the People's Academy Task Force, which has been working diligently over more than the past 1.5 years to develop the curriculum. Jean Myrer, June Sasimoto, Maria LaHood, Gail Davidson, Marty Schmidt, and Charlotte Cates. Bill Bowring and Jan Fermon have also helped to develop the People's Academy. We will begin our online instruction on November 3rd of this year. Our website is peoplesacademy.net. Registration will take place. We will email you if you have registered for this webinar, and you can sign up for one or more courses or seminars on an online intake form. We will announce the schedule of courses and faculty in the coming months. We aim to have several multilingual courses and will let folks know which languages will be translated when each course and seminar is announced. We will be charging a nominal fee. We will have a sliding scale and hope to provide scholarships. We will also provide written materials that people can use for continuing legal education credit. We hope you will spread the word about the People's Academy of International Law. You can put information for other constituencies we can contact in the chat during the webinar. But please remember to put your questions in the Q&A box as we go throughout the webinar because we will have a discussion at the end. We are going to begin with Charlotte Cates. Charlotte is coordinator of the International Committee of the National Lawyers Guild, as well as IADL. She will introduce the members of our scientific committee. Then we will hear from Jean Myrer, president of IADL, who will present our course curriculum. Charlotte will then present statements from more scientific committee members. And then June Sasimoto, who is president of the Confederation of Lawyers of Asia and the Pacific, will present our seminar curriculum. Charlotte will then present statements from the remaining scientific committee members. Then Walid Okayas from Droit Solidarité in France will describe the work of Monique and Roland Veil, for whom the Academy is named. So we will begin with Charlotte. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marjorie. One of the things that is so special about the People's Academy of International Law is the distinguished and multinational array of people who have come together to be part of the scientific committee to ensure the theoretical richness of the program, working closely together with the task force. And we have some short messages that we'll be sharing today with different members of the scientific committee, and we'll be presenting them generally in alphabetical order. So first we'll be hearing from Phyllis Bennis, Director of the New Internationalism Project at the Institute for Policy Studies, Mary Colmenares, a Filipino human rights lawyer and activist, formerly the Senior Deputy Minority Leader of the 16th Congress of the Philippines, and Radha D'Souza, a law professor at the University of Westminster, London.
It's not very often that we hear the words people and international law in the same sentence. The creation of the People's Academy of International Law represents a terrific potential challenge to the historic abuse and distortion of international law by the forces of militarism, corporate greed, unilateralism, authoritarianism, climate destruction, imperialism, and more. No laws, not domestic law in any country, not international humanitarian law or human rights laws, not treaties, not the decisions of international courts, none of them are self-enforcing. None of them work unless we create and support and defend institutions to enforce those laws. None of them work on their own. They're only relevant when we claim them as our own, when we claim international law as an instrument of struggle and liberation, and when we claim it as a vehicle to protect human rights defenders and, most of all, the most vulnerable among us: asylum seekers, dispossessed communities, racial minorities, and so many more all around the world. That means we have to work to make international law, with all of its limitations and challenges, but with all of its potential too, accessible, understandable, and usable by everyone fighting for justice around the world. 70 years ago or more, a photograph surfaced that would go viral years later. It showed a group of Black sharecroppers, farm workers in the southern US states that had once been the centerpiece of slavery and the most violent forms of white supremacy. Their clothes were ragged, they were desperately poor. They carried signs calling for justice, in this case for the right to vote. And they carried a single flag, the blue and white banner of the United Nations, the new United Nations. The UN and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights represented their hopes at a moment when their government offered no hope at all for a better life, let alone for justice. Things haven't changed enough. Governments still don't provide enough hope for justice. International law won't provide justice by itself either. But what a tool it can provide. What a powerful instrument in the ongoing struggle for justice around the world. And with the People's Academy of International Law opening its doors to all those who fight for justice, to learn and to teach how international law can work, we all certainly have a much better chance at winning that struggle for justice.
We would like to express our strongest support to the Monique and Roland Vail Academy, People's Academy on International Law, and our commendation to the IADL for taking this initiative to do battle in the international law arena through the democratization and popularization of the teaching of international law to empower the people to use these international instruments as tools in the people's struggle. I'm sure Monique and Roland would be very happy with this very important undertaking. The National Union of People's Lawyers, we have been employing UN mechanisms to help victims of injustice in the Philippines and in order to curb impunity in our country. Recently, 2018, we filed a case before the International Criminal Court on behalf of families of victims of extrajudicial killings against President Rodrigo Duterte for crimes against humanity. The families of the victims hope that they can achieve justice in the ICC, justice which have long escaped them in our domestic jurisdiction, and that the Rome Statute's accountability mechanisms will not go the same way as many international law instruments that were ultimately used by perpetrators of human rights violations to shield themselves from accountability. I remember appearing before the federal court in Hawaii in the case of Hilao versus Marcos, a class suit under the Alien Tort Claim Act. The victims, the 10,000 victims of human rights violations, won a major victory there when the court adjudged Marcos guilty of human rights atrocities and awarded 2.1 billion US dollars, total of $2.1 billion to his victims. However, the promise of justice of the Alien Tort Claim Act foundered in the mechanical interpretation of extraterritoriality and as well as the relentless attacks of transnational corporations and rightists and conservatives. This is where the People's Academy would come into play, very important role, to ensure that international law will be harnessed by the people and the people's struggle to achieve and help in the struggle of the people for justice, freedom, and democracy and human rights. And I'm very, very happy with the list of legal luminaries and lecturers of the Academy who will take up this task of mainly contributing in this undertaking to ensure that international law will be used for the benefit of human rights violations victims, the people's struggle, and the people. Congratulations on this very important undertaking, and in the introductory seminar of the People's Academy, we will continue to support you and all the undertaking. Together, we will all commit to this effort to harness international law for the benefit of the people's struggle for justice, human rights, and freedom. Congratulations. Maraming salamat.
Greetings, everyone. The role of international law in holding up contemporary imperialism and neocolonialism is perhaps one of the least understood areas or aspects of this world order that came about after the end of World War II. International law today has almost become like a mystical force. Everyone refers to international law, but nobody really understands how it works, the nuts and bolts of it. International law is mired in normative thinking and aspirational expectations. Hard questions about its genesis, its history, especially its history in imperialism and colonialism, who wrote international law and why, and under what conditions, its institutional architecture, and how those institutions reproduce unequal, even exploitative relationships between states, between nations, and between people need to be asked. They need to be asked particularly by activists, by people's lawyers, by activist scholars, and all those who want to make this world a just and peaceful place. And they need to find answers to these big questions so that they can put their own work into perspective. And that is why I think the People's Academy of International Law is a much needed educational program in today's context and in our times. It is needed for students, it is needed for activists, it is needed for lawyers and scholars who work for a just and fair world. And that is why I am absolutely delighted that the People's Academy of International Law will be offering public education to all those who want to make this world a better place, and so that they can understand the kind of world that we live in today. Thank you.
Thank you, Marjorie, and thank you everyone for joining today's webinar as the official launch of the People's Academy of the Monique and Roland Weil People's Academy of International Law. This has been a dream of mine for a long time, and I've been so happy to be able to work with the task force and all of our wonderful members of the scientific committee. And having met Roland and Monique and worked with them for almost 20 years, I feel privileged to have learned so much from them that we now need to impart to the rest of the people's lawyers and progressive activists in the world. The courses that will be presented are comprehensive, and they raise many, many questions, but time will prevent me from going into them in depth. But the first course will be the seminal course on the UN Charter and its genesis, and especially its genesis in the anti-fascist struggles after World War II. The main understanding of the UN Charter initially by the allies that were creating it was more for collective security, but it was the people's struggles, even members of the National Lawyers Guild, who went to San Francisco and demanded that economic human rights and human rights be part of the right, although it's not in the charter, the right of self-determination be part of the development of the United Nations. So the first course will be on the charter, its genesis, essential principles, and relevance today. The second will discuss the UN organs. Most people know about the General Assembly. They've probably heard about the Security Council, but there are other organs of the UN that are very important that fill in many of the gaps. The Court of Justice, as well as the Economic and Social Council. There are also many specialized agencies, which includes the Human Rights Council, the World Health Organization, the International Labor Organization, UNESCO, and several what might be called Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, and the World Trade Organization, and how those particular entities, the international financial institutions, have in fact worked to undermine human rights. The next course will be human rights and people's rights. And in fact, this is the area where we will talk about the UN instruments, in particular the two covenants from 1966, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Both of those covenants grew out of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from 1948. We'll also be spending a significant amount of time on labor rights, because workers of the world really do need to work in global solidarity, where capital is global, but labor is not. The next course will be discussing different regional systems for human rights, including the Inter-American, the European, and the African. Continuing on, we will then talk about an important part of the UN Charter of peacekeeping, which is the law of armed conflict, and what makes a war legal or illegal. And we can't spend too much time on that today, but part of the law of armed conflict is international humanitarian law and refugee law and the rights of persons displaced by war, and liberation and resistance movements. We will also have the course on international crimes, repression, and the fight against impunity. Impunity is a major problem and a major source of crisis in international law. because the more that it's violated, the more it seems that it's okay to violate it. And that is something that the People's Academy and progressive lawyers need to fight against. Liberation and emancipation struggles in international law are the next topic as well, and we will finally finish with the crisis of capitalism, of international law, and the crisis of world capitalism. I would like to now turn it back to Charlotte and for the next part of our presentation.
Thank you so much, Jeannie, for a preview of the courses that we're going to be delving into more deeply in the People's Academy of International Law. Next, we'll be hearing from several more members of our distinguished scientific committee. We'll be hearing from Richard Falk, Professor Emeritus of International Law at Princeton University, Arturo Forne Faccio, Costa Rican lawyer and retired diplomat, Lennox Hines, Professor Emeritus in the Program in Criminal Justice at Rutgers University and permanent representative of the IADL to the United Nations, and Rashida Manju, Emeritus Professor at the University of Cape Town and former United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women.
Great pleasure for me to welcome the establishment of the People's Academy of International Law. Especially those of us in the United States have every progressive reason to want our own government's foreign policy to be respectful of international law the way it has not been in the last several decades. And it's of great importance now that the US is projecting its power over much of the world, proclaiming in effect a Monroe Doctrine for the world, not just for Latin America. It's imperative that civil society establish learning communities that come to grips with the real crisis of geopolitics that is neglectful of the UN, of international law, and of overall moral restraints. So I'm very hopeful that this Academy initiative will make progress toward a more effective and progressive international law for the peoples of the world.
Hello, I've been honored to be invited by the International Association of Democratic Lawyers to join this scientific committee aimed at achieving the just principles stated in the Charter of the United Nations, especially those regarding real democracy to encourage the maintenance of a fair peace without arms race and just cooperation among nations and people of the world through the rule of international law, and among other many purposes and objectives to promote human and people's rights based on economic equality with work and food for every human being, the preservation of nature for insurance, ecology, healthy environment, and in order to guarantee the future of the world, which is in danger nowadays, the independence of the judiciary and the legal profession to achieve justice for all. Thank you.
My name is Lennox Hines. I have taught at Rutgers University for over 40 years. My specialty has been criminal law and international law. I agreed to participate and to be a member of the scientific committee associated with the People's Academy of International Law because I'm convinced that it is important for progressive lawyers to be educated, not only about the principles of international law, but also progressive judges should be educated so that they could understand the impact that international law could have on their decision making. I think illustrates the point that I'm trying to make is the case of Nicaragua versus the United States, the 1986 case, in which under the presidency of Ronald Reagan, the United States decided to support the Contras in Nicaragua and decided to mine the harbors of Nicaragua, clearly in violation of international law. The International Court of Justice in The Hague found against the United States. Again, it shows the use of international law to speak truth to power. So I've decided to participate on the scientific committee because I'm convinced that this People's Academy will add to the jurisprudence of progressive jurisprudence of international law. Thank you very much.
Good day, colleagues. My name is Rashida Manju. I'm Thank you very much to Marjorie Cohen and colleagues for inviting me. I think it's really important that the International Association of Democratic Lawyers is going the next step in terms of consolidating, in a sense, the work that comes out of the annual meeting, the congresses, the different webinars, the research work that gets done. We tend to forget that there's a whole constituency out there sometimes that is not on the same page, and I think it's really important. The idea of topic-based webinars, which are more accessible, and we live in a digital world now, makes it easier to do this kind of educative work. That there is a wide range of experiences, expertise that challenges our geographic and other boundaries. And I like the fact that the racial, the gendered, the North-South, the colonial, neo-colonial aspects are part and parcel of the thinking amongst members of the association. And this richness will be reflected in the work of the People's Academy of International Law. So I'm really pleased to be part of the scientific committee, and hopefully I'll be able to contribute based on my national, regional, and international level experience. Thank you very much once again for inviting me.
Thank you. And now we will hear from June Sasimoto about the curriculum of seminars.
Thank you, Marjorie. From me, I will give you a brief introduction of 10 seminars. We prepared 10 seminars apart from courses. The seminar speakers consists of mainly practical lawyers from IADL and researchers and activists in the world. 10 seminars focus on how to use international law in the people's struggle. The speakers will talk about their struggle with how to invoke the international laws and assert progressive interpretation inside and outside the court on the basis of their struggles. The seminar one is topic is right to health and right to environment. The right to health and the environment is one of the most important in our time. Climate change is an urgent matter we should address. The right to health is an international human right, and right to environment was recognized by UN Human Rights Council in 2021. So we talk about the struggle against climate change and various environment destructions. The seminar 2 is unilateral coercive measures. According to the UN Charter, economic sanction is allowed only when the UN Security Council makes a decision in the Article 41. But actually, United States and their allies impose many unilateral economic sanctions. We seek this program and pursue the illegality of the unilateral coercive measures. UN Human Rights Council also put a special rapporteur on this topic. Seminar 3 is the use of law against justice. People's struggle also faces repression from the government or opponents. Sometimes they use law and court as lawfare or weapons like slap actions. Meanwhile, registration for oppression to leftists and activists are spreading in many countries by the name of against terrorists or for security reasons. We have to consider how to tackle these matters. Seminar 4 topic is abolition of nuclear weapons and nuclear power plants. The treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons was adopted, but meanwhile, non-proliferation treaty is an unequal system, and IAEA is also to promote nuclear power generation. We should consider these contradicted situations, especially under the nuclear crisis in Ukraine and East Asia. Seminar 5 topic is using international law against new liberalism and corporate dominations. We should use the international law, especially international human rights law, in the domestic court, and we can develop the right to development that is recognized by the UN United Nations. Seminar 6 is Palestine and Western Sahara issue. Right of self-determination of peoples is incorporated in the both international human rights treaty. We can use and develop it for the people's struggle in Palestine and Western Sahara. Seminar 7 is Korean unification and international law. Korean War casts various legal issues from the international law perspective. The UN Security Council resolution in 1950 in Korean War allowed the United States only to organize the multinational forces. It is not a UN force. But now, UN command and the UN military forces play an obstacle role in Korean unification. We explore the legal issue around the Korean Peninsula. Seminar 8 topic is indigenous people's struggle. Indigenous people's right was recognized by United Nations Secret Declaration in 2007. This slide was indicates a non-state-based system. We explore this indigenous people's right for their struggle. Seminar 9, it is independence of judiciary and protect of lawyers. Lawyers as human rights defenders are attacked physically and in the court in various countries. We pick up the case in the Philippines and Turkey, and we should develop using the international law and UN basic principle of roles of lawyers. The last seminar is about right to peace. UN Declaration of Right to Peace was adopted in 2016. The right to peace was generated from the preamble of UN Charter. It also indicates that people can involved in the security field that has been occupied by the states. We consider this right for developing peace in the world. These are all 10 seminars, and we are looking forward to seeing you in the seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, June, for describing our seminars. Next, Charlotte will introduce more members of our scientific committee.
Thank you so much, June and Marjorie, for going over the seminars that will be part of the upcoming program of the Academy. Our next distinguished members of the scientific committee that we'll be hearing from are Yoshiro Matsui, an emeritus professor of international law at Nagoya University in Japan, Luis Carlos Moro, a Brazilian labor lawyer and professor, and the Secretary General of the American Association of Jurists, Willie Mutunga, former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Kenya, and John Quigley, a professor of law at the Moritz College of Law at The Ohio State University.
Dear colleagues, this is Matsui, a member of the Scientific Committee from Japan. I would like to speak about usefulness of international law studies today. It is widely accepted that Russian aggression against Ukraine is a flagrant outrage against international law. However, international law has not yet succeeded in holding back Russian aggression. It seems natural, therefore, that an argument of powerless international law has been emerged. Then, for what purpose does international law serve? Above all, international law serves as an objective standard for us to judge international affairs. Judgment based on subjective standards such as political orientation or cultural tradition cannot persuade people with different viewpoints. On the other hand, international law is the objective standard based on agreements which peoples and nations have established through long efforts. Therefore, the international law researchers can help peoples to act hand in hand against Putin's outrage by showing that how it is in violation of the established principles and norms of international law. This is not the end of it. As an argument of powerless international law shows, international law is still insufficient for its defects and biases. Where the international law researchers can show how to correct these defects of international law, thus can contribute, even if modestly, to the democratic transformation of international community. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Luis Carlos Moro from Brazil. I am General Secretary of the AAJ, American Association of Jurists, and a member of the Bureau of the International Association of Democratic Lawyers. I would like to congratulate IADL for the initiative to create the People's Academy Monique and Roland Weil. At the same time that I invite all those who fight for human rights causes to join us in this endeavor and contribute to dissemination of knowledge and practice of human rights. The world needs this. Come with us.
I am sure this is a great initiative, having the People's Academy. It's a great solidarity, between the North and the South. And my interest is basically about transformative constitutions in the global South that adopt international law. And their basis of doing that is to ensure that they develop international law from its illegitimacy and its justification of domination, exploitation, and oppression, and make international law be an instrument of change for a just planet.
The Academy is a very exciting project, and we're all very happy that it is now being launched because of the importance of international law to the work that we all do on international issues. And the international law aspect of that is, of course, quite key. And I'd just like to talk very briefly about some of the things that I am involved in that are, I think, representative of those that are done by many of the others, and how we use international law. One way in which I'm currently using it relates to capital punishment. Trying to prohibit capital punishment throughout the world. There is an element of international law involved. I have been working on the Ukraine war and trying to figure out ways to bring it to an end. And that involves issues of international law. You need to know the underlying aspects of international law that apply. I've also been involved in working on the history of the League of Nations with regard to the Palestine question, which is something that has not received a great deal of attention, but is very relevant to current issues to resolve the Arab-Israeli conflict. So these are just examples, but the others who are involved in this project, either on the scientific committee or in teaching courses, we are all involved in this kind of thing. So we have that expertise in how to use international law to achieve what hopefully are better outcomes than many of those that are achieved on different issues by the international community currently. So I welcome everyone who is going to be involved in this in whatever capacity. and we're hoping that it will have a very positive outcome.
Thank you very much. Next, we will hear from Walid Okayas about the work of Monique and Roland Veil, for whom our People's Academy is named. Walid?
Yes, 1 minute, please. I have a very big problems with my computer today. I hope we can see each other now. Yes. Yes. Hello, everybody. So happy to meet you. I was given 2 minutes in the beginning, so I prepared for 2 minutes. It's a difficult task. How can I present all Roland's books in 2 minutes? And me who speaks a lot, now already I'm losing time. So I try in 2 minutes, and then at the 3 minutes, we'll, for a biography of Roland and Monique, about their works, we have the IIDL review who gave a list, but it doesn't give all the works, because there is too many works made by articles, and we are trying to assemble all this, and we are trying to translate into other languages, because it's not easy sometimes for a lawyer to read in French. I mean, now to summarize, I think that the book, I don't know if you can see it, Sortir le droit du placard, the caricature. We can see the humanitarian aid, what it gives victims behind, and then the force, the might, and then the charter. That's, I mean, you can see it, how the charter is treated. So, if I want to summarize Roland and Monique, there is a text here, the first chapter, I translated it, and I transmitted to friends. I mean, you can transmit it, I proofread it again and again. You can transmit it to to everybody you want. And then, in this text, sortir le droit international du placard, because it's hidden. You have to bring it out to the light, because everything is done to make it ignore, to tell people you can't do anything, there is nothing to be done. So it's very representative of Monique and Roland works and approach of international law that they shared with many comrades and friends in France. You can see it's the school of the resistance, I call it, the French resistance and European resistance. These are values of resistance. I mean, apart from this, and they share these values and this approach, and they wanted to transmit it. The beautiful things in their work is they try to transmit international law to people that are not lawyers. They are involving non-lawyers in the fight, and it's very simple, clear, concise, precise writing, destined to new generation of lawyers and non-lawyers fighting for people and human rights. Approach considering in full compliance with the UN Charter that international peace and security and people first peace in the book peace, and then the legality is in the hand of people. We, the people of United Nations. That mean, and then it was clarified in the two Pacts of '66 that the first rights of human beings is the right of his people to self-determination. So the two keys are peace and security and collective security, and the self-determination. It's the base of everything. You can see, for example, what he proposed also in the IIDL review what Roland proposed. And when you say Roland, it's Monique, I mean, because they have a very, very common, how we can solve the problem of Ukraine from 2014, since the beginning, based on people's right, because we can't find any, it prevails over all other principles. So it's good to see this in the review too. And they're very courageous. There's courageousness in their work. They were courageous. For example, NATO and international legality. I mean, they were very courageous to write this. You have the reason why it's illegal NATO. And then they wanted to put the financial institution within the scope of the charter, because a financial institution were reserved before the idea is peace, self-determination, and the fight for a new democratic international economic order. And then Iran used to say, if people are united with international law in their hands, it has, and the academy, I hope we're gonna help doing this, they won't be defeated, said Roland. That's it. So that's what I can say. I mean, even 10 minutes, 1 hour. So I wish you can see the review from time to time and contribute in it. Whenever you want, we have each year an issue concerning the United Nations Charter, and I'm sure you have lovely pens to write. You know. Thank you very much. I think it's more than 5 minutes now. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Walid, for talking about the importance of the work of Monique and Roland Weil, who were founding members of IADL and luminaries in the struggle to make the guarantees in the UN Charter a reality. And I also want to second Walid's just mention of the IADL review. You can find it on our website, IADL Law. And now Charlotte will present the remaining members of the scientific committee.
Thank you so much, Walid. And I've put a link in the chat for people to, from a document that Walid has put together on the writings of Monique and Roland Weil. Unfortunately, we do not have a video from one member of our scientific committee, Raji Sourani, the general director of the Palestinian Center for Human Rights based in Gaza, because of some personal and family circumstances. But we are very excited that Raji is one of the members of our distinguished scientific committee. Next, we will be hearing from Natalie Segovia, an international human rights lawyer and legal director of the Water Protector Legal Collective, Ashwini Suklankar, an international labor rights lawyer who is organized with the International Center for Labor Rights, Carlos Villandoran, a professor of international human rights law at the University of Alcalá in Spain. And we'll also be hearing from Yamila Gonzalez Ferrer, the vice president of the National Union of Jurists, Cuba.
Ayayanchu, greetings all. My name is Natalie Segovia. I am pleased and honored to be a part of the Scientific Committee of the People's Academy of International Law. As an international human rights attorney centered on environmental human rights and protection of those that defend ancestral lands, water, and earth against desecration, I've seen firsthand on too many occasions the forced displacement of Indigenous peoples and other underrepresented communities that are impacted by ongoing desecration of ancestral lands by international corporations and state interests, whether for natural resource extraction, infrastructure, or other commercial developments, or due to armed conflict. Around the world, frontline human rights defenders are more at risk of targeting for their human rights work. In 2021, according to the Global Analysis Annual Report published by Frontline Defenders, 358 human rights defenders from 35 different countries were killed. Of these, 59% worked on defending land, environmental, and indigenous peoples' rights. 26% of human rights defenders killed were indigenous peoples, and 18% included women. I currently serve as the legal director of the Water Protector Legal Collective, an indigenous-led legal nonprofit that began at Standing Rock in defense of water protectors and land defenders who were defending the water against desecration. In that capacity, we have seen a growing worrisome trend in the United States of the criminalization of protest and the labeling of environmental protectors and protection and defense of land as domestic terrorism. While the mechanisms of state and corporate actors have committed human rights violations, both internationally and within the United States, despite this repression, I've also seen amazing examples of indigenous peoples, community organizers, jurists, and others working together to address displacement, human rights violations, and finding ways to build collective memory and power, as well as spaces for knowledge sharing. The People's Academy of International Law is one such space. It was created to provide education about international legal principles and how to use them to further people's struggles. While too often the national frameworks fail indigenous peoples and human rights defenders, knowledge of international law principles, not just how international mechanisms or how international fora work, are crucial for a broad understanding of foundational basic principles that underlie the rights that as human beings on this earth we should all have. I hope that whether you are a jurist, a lawyer, organizer, or simply wanting to learn more about international human rights law and how these principles can be useful in practice to communities, you'll consider joining us at the People's Academy of International Law. Yipai Chani, many thanks and prayers for you on your continued journey.
This is Ashwini Suktankar. I'm a trade unionist, a labor lawyer, and for a long time I've been a part of the IADL project, the International Commission for Labor Rights. I'm so excited about the People's Academy for International Law, and in particular about the idea of a consolidated effort to take back international labor standards for working people in our movements, whether it's the right to build a union or the right to strike or the right to a living wage. The Academy promises a space for us to remind ourselves and a new generation of activists about the radical roots of international labor law, frameworks that corporations and right-wing governments have been trying to blunt and erode for generations. We have to invest in learning and teaching about these critical and powerful tools and the international institutions that working people helped build.
Dear colleagues, it is a pleasure to me to join the scientific committee of the People's Academy of International Law, a welcome initiative of the International Association of Democratic Lawyers, aiming to disseminate the values of international law, multilateralism, human rights, and the right of peoples to self-determination. In times of crisis, the Spanish Society for International Human Rights Law believes that international law is the best tool in the people's hands to defend their rights. The purpose and principles set up in the 1945 Charter of the United Nations must be reaffirmed to combat the proliferation of armed conflicts, arms race, and the increasing threat of nuclear war. In addition, the international human rights law provides to both individuals and peoples ways to claim their rights to be protected at the international level. Human rights include both civil and political rights, economic, social, and cultural rights, as well as collective rights such as the rights to self-determination, to development, to environment, and the right to peace and disarmament. Since 2005, our society promotes the human and people's right to peace to be fully recognized by the international community. The 2017 General Assembly Declaration on the Right to Peace should therefore be further developed to include all human and collective rights that are necessary to reach the UN Sustainable Development Goals in 2030. Thank you very much for your attention.
Un fuerte abrazo desde Cuba para todos los miembros de la Academia Popular de Derecho Internacional. Me siento muy honrada de ser parte del comité científico y tener la posibilidad de aportar junto a ustedes en la formación sobre los principios jurídicos internacionales para la promoción de la lucha de nuestros pueblos. Un fuerte abrazo y aquí estamos.
Thank you so much to all of the members of our scientific committee. We are honored to have you as part of our initiative and look forward to working with you to make the People's Academy of International Law a success. We will now turn to the last part of our program, which is the discussion portion. We have about 12 minutes left. And so if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. I have noticed that Richard Falk, who is one of our members of the scientific committee, has raised a couple of points. Richard, would you like to take the floor? I don't know if Richard is still with us. There he is. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Oh,
thank you.
I want to raise the question of how the Academy sees its work in connection with the existing progressive association of international law experts in the so-called Twale movement. That was one question. The second question was the importance of recognizing that international law is abused, especially by the US, in implementing double standards, being silent about Israel's violations of international law while making a great deal of emphasis on China or Russia's violations. In other words, using international law as a geopolitical tool rather than as a regulative principle applicable to behavior of all states, powerful or weak, and north or south. And finally, I wanted to say that it's important to include Kashmir with Western Sahara and Palestine in approaching the struggles of oppressed people for liberation in situations where self-determination has been cruelly and violently suppressed over the decades.
Thank you, Richard. Your point is well taken about Kashmir, and I'm sure that we will add that to our seminar on Palestine and Western Sahara. In terms of Twale, if people don't know what it is, it's third world approaches to international law. It's a critical school of international legal scholarship and an intellectual political movement, and we will certainly incorporate that into our curriculum. And finally, your point is very well taken about international law being used against adversaries of repressive regimes, but not against their allies. And of course, Israel is a prime example, and we will discuss that in the Academy as well. So thank you very much for those observations. Do we have other questions or discussion points that people would like to raise right now? Okay, well, that concludes our official launch of the Monique and Roland Weil People's Academy of International Law. It looks like, I'm sorry, we have one more question from Curtis Dobler, who is a very active and progressive lawyer who uses international law to vindicate people's rights, and we're delighted to have Curtis with us today. And Curtis asks, how are the views and concerns of African jurists being taken into account? Thank you for that, Curtis. We do have some representation from Africa on our scientific committee, and as we recruit our faculty, we are recruiting faculty members from different African countries. We also have a seminar, actually it's a course, devoted to the three regional systems, the Inter-American system, the European system, and the African system based on the Banjul Charter, or the Charter for Human and People's Rights. So we will be incorporating principles from the African struggles into our curriculum. Thank you for that. I think that, are there any other questions or comments before we conclude? Okay, well, thank you so much for attending our official launch webinar. We are looking forward to the actual beginning of classes on November 3rd, later this year. We will be sending you emails, updating you on the faculty who are confirmed. We have several already on the list, but we want to confirm the entire faculty before we actually announce them to the public, and we will be refining our program. We look forward to your input, your participation, and hope you will join us in registering for the People's Academy of International Law. So on behalf of the task force of the People's Academy, I would like to thank everyone for attending, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you so much.